podcast. My wife took my laptop. So now I'm trying to figure out on Windows how to do all this stuff.
I know I have the most up-to-date version of Skype because it updated as I was trying to launch it just now.
Same here.
In the lower right, there's a plus bar,
Uh-huh.
a plus sign. If you hit that, you can choose start recording.
It just says hold call.
Oh.
Oh, yeah, as a presenter, you might be different. Hold on, what does it look like on our end?
You're not like the little mini window, the full window?
Yeah, more options says hold call, and...
Yeah. That's all I got.
That's all I got. I guess you're the only one that can record.
I think whoever's in charge can do that.
Yeah. Well, I've got it recording in Skype and on the Zoom, so we should be okay.
We should be all right.
Well, I just need to figure out what the program is and figure out how to search for it on Windows.
I'm pretty sure it was just called voice recorder, and if you go in the bottom left...
There it is. I got it.
Yeah.
Worked pretty... Did you check that file? Did it work good?
I don't think I checked it, but I'm sure it worked fine.
Oh, that's what I wanted. I'm sorry. I'm staring at my setup, and I realized I got an extra cable, and I was like, where does it go to? It's the power supply for the Zoom. So let me get this off batteries and plugged in before we actually record.
Okay, yeah.
Hey, Sean, while we're going through this, I had me doing the intro and you doing the outro. So
I am
cool.
fine with that. I saw the color codes. I'm good.
Yeah.
I appreciate the effort. Thank you.
And by the way, Zach and Casey, I'm Kyle. So
Kyle.
Zach, it's Zach Higgins and Casey Martin.
Correct.
All right.
Nice to meet you, Kyle.
Nice to meet you.
Not Zach Martin and Casey Higgins. Just to be sure.
Oh, that's kind of funny if you said that.
Hey, I might do that. I'm
Yeah.
good.
A weird sort of dyslexia child. What is that humming I'm hearing?
Yeah, I'm hearing it too.
What do you hear?
Yeah, I'm hearing it as well.
Zach, are you running a vacuum pump or something?
Well, actually, yeah, two of them. But they're outside the building.
Okay, they weren't cycling next to you. There's some hum. It's a low level buzz.
I hear it too. I don't know.
I don't hear it.
I don't
It just got a
think.
little louder.
Trying to move things around.
Let me see. Could be mine. Let me see.
And actually, Dyami, if you can't hear it, it might be okay to record.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was my mic. Is it gone now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Okay.
never mind. It's back.
Yeah, it's not mine then, because I just switched. Or now it is gone.
Yes, now it is.
Yeah, I was using my actual real mic for the Skype mic, and I think since I had it recording in a separate program, it was causing interference.
Oh right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it only started happening when I started recording. Anyway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's coming and going.
Yeah. I hear it again. I don't think it would be me then. If I just switched microphones on Skype and it's still happening.
Yeah, I don't hear it at all.
Okay. Well, maybe it's you. And
Yeah, it might be you.
Does that make it go away?
Yes.
Yep.
Huh.
It's intermittent.
But it's still gone away.
No, it just came back
Okay.
right before a thump.
I'm gonna plug this back in because that was the power supply for the recorder.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, you might have.
But I use that literally every single night.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't.
It won't be the worst audio issue we've had. Just saying.
I don't know. The last episode, I had a shitload of editing to do.
Did you
We had a feedback loop from Chris's computer.
Yeah. As soon as Chris joined, we started getting some feedback.
Yeah, I just thought Tom was blowing out everything.
Tom's loud.
Peaking all levels.
Good old Tom.
Yeah. All right. So I still can't hear this noise. Is this something we can live with, or do we need to keep messing around to try to
we
get
can
rid
live with it. It's low.
Yeah, whenever somebody's talking, you can't really hear it. That's how low it is. So
Yeah, it's when the silence is. So we just got to talk continually.
Challenge accepted.
We got 5 people. It shouldn't be too hard.
True. All right, that sounds like preparation.
Yeah,
Yep.
I was bent over opening the cooler.
Yeah, you're going to give me a hard time over what I'm drinking. Well, it's in the show notes.
You make me look ahead.
Carbocule. Yeah.
Fucking
got
Christmas?
We got Christmas L's.
Oh my God, everything is Christmas.
Oh my. All right.
Everything.
And there's still some Oktoberfest left too.
Oh, we can't even find that. I went in with
Oh.
my wife, and she's like, "I can do it with a pumpkin." I'm like, "Yeah, no." Or they're plumb out of them. There's nothing.
You guys have video on?
No.
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 Just wanted to make sure.
And
Alas, it does not. It doesn't agree with actually being able to record.
I look like this. Let's move the mic down. There you go. That's what I look like. Oh, and then I dropped the camera.
I don't even know if mine works.
It's a nice no signal sign you have.
Yeah, I know. It dropped right away. That's weird.
Yeah.
And I'm plugged in. The kids are probably playing Fortnite, so.
Okay.
Man, you're wearing a jacket and everything. It's still it's 85 here today.
Shut the hell up.
Yeah.
Well,
we got
I was
a
up
cold
on roof
front.
today in short sleeves. It was not bad.
Yeah, we got a cold front coming in. It's supposed to be getting down into the 60s by Friday.
Oh.
I think Saturday's high is 36.
Oh.
Wow.
Dang. It's been pretty nice here. It's been elusive. It's like 70, 60 something during the day, and then like it's dropping way low at night, and it seems like it's kind of becoming winter soon at night, but it's like perfect during the day. I'm just waiting. But I would rather have it just be snowing personally. Snowboarding season. Bring it on.
In years. All right. Again, we kind of already said it, but Zach, you know the drill. Casey, if you're comfortable, I should suggest we should probably just get going.
Yeah.
I agree.
Sounds like a good idea.
You ready?
Um,
Okay, here we go.
Hold on.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Hi, and welcome to the 218th episode of the Modern Woodworkers Association podcast. I'm Kyle Barton of Windsor Wonderland, and I'm here with my co-host, Dyami Plotke of the Penultimate Woodshop and Sean Wisniewski of the Corner Workshop. We're talking tonight to Zach Higgins and Casey Martin of the Resin Cast podcast. So, Dyami, what are you working on these days?
Well, since the fence is not done and I have to share a house and a bed with my wife, I got back to work on the entertainment center this past weekend.
I noticed that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so it's the 4 giant slabs. I'm sure all the listeners know this by heart, but they're 1.5 inches thick, 20 inches wide, 12 foot long. One of them was actually only 16 inches wide, but they were the last we spoke of them. I had buttered them all with a thickened blue dyed epoxy to fill in all the voids in the timber strand, and where they're rounded over, because all the edges are rounded over. Where they're rounded over, I went with a very thick application of the epoxy rather. Because what I find is when I kind of scrape it smooth to the surface, by the time the epoxy dries, sometimes it's still just a little shallow and it doesn't make a perfectly flat surface by the time I sand it. So
Right.
I didn't want to have to butter up these rounded over edges multiple times, so I went really heavy on the epoxy. So now I have a thin layer of epoxy on the surface of these slabs and big, like sharp globs of epoxy on the roundovers. I had previously figured out how to get the epoxy off the surface, which was with a 24 grit belt sander. And you can't really use a 4-inch wide 24 grit belt sander on curves.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the Festool linear sander.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah, you got that one where you can mold different shapes into the bottom of it, and
Well, yes,
yeah.
you can.
Yeah.
I just had the factory like half round mold, which through pure dumb luck is basically the perfect size for these roundovers. And it only goes back and forth. It's a linear sander. It doesn't do an orbit, so it's really good at these like lengthwise shapes. The problem though is it's even with I think I have 40 grit papers, the coarsest paper I have for it. It was not quite aggressive enough. Like it would knock all the sharp edges off, which was nice, but then it just took forever to get the epoxy off down to what's essentially bare wood. So then I resorted back to my my Rotex, my RO150, which is the big monster Rotex, and I used an interface pad, and I only had 60 grit paper in that size, was the coarsest I had. But with the interface pad and the 60 grit in Rotex mode, it did a fine job of getting it off. But the problem I ran into is I destroyed the interface pad. I don't know if you guys have ever used the interface pads, but they're the foam pads that Festool makes.
Right.
And it lets you do curves without flattening them, or it greatly reduces the flattening you do when you're doing a curve. Mm-hmm. And they do wear when you're taking paper on and off them. The Velcro tends to separate from the foam core of the pad. But I just destroyed a pad on Saturday. I've never destroyed it the way I did on Saturday. And some of that might be because the platen, the actual disc on the RO150, kept coming off. Now they're interchangeable because they have hard and soft platens. But I would basically touch the sander to the wood and it would fly away. And I'm doing this in my driveway. So at one point it flew into my front yard and it took me about 15 minutes to find where it went. It flew so far away.
And you're cussing the entire time.
I am. And I'm what I'm doing is I'm thinking of how expensive this stupid sander is and that I can't keep a platen on it.
Yeah.
So when it was in random orbit mode, the platen would not stay on, period.
Oh.
When it was in Rotex mode, the platen stayed on for the most part, but if I knocked it the wrong way, it would just instantly fly off. And I've never experienced this with this sander, and I would have assumed they just kind of twist on, but I would have assumed they twist on opposite the direction of the spinning, so the spinning just keeps them tighter.
Right.
But I honestly, I don't know why. And I went to a local Festool dealer today because I bought 2 more interface pads, and I bought 40 grit paper. So I was talking to them about it, and they've never heard of the platens coming off, so that was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I wonder if you just got to run with where some defect in whatever binds them together. Is it just like plastic tabs that go up in and twist?
It's a steel piece in the sander, and plastic. It's basically threads, and it's
on the platen. Okay.
Yeah. So there's basically 3 teeth, and it gives a third of a turn, and they lock together.
I don't know.
That's weird.
So. Yeah, so I don't know, but in any event, I managed to get one of the slabs, the edge, completely sanded. And what I ended up doing is I used the linear sander to make the epoxy so it wasn't sharp. Then I took the Rotex and got all the epoxy off. Then I went back to the linear sander and kind of refined the shape, and any little facets I'd accidentally created, I got out with the linear sander that had a half-round shape in it. And that worked pretty well. So now that one slab is ready to be sanded. Like I've gotten all the epoxy off, but it's in various stages of sanding, anywhere from 40 grit to 60 grit. So I really just needed to run it through normal finish sanding at this point. And then I have 3 more slabs that I still have to get the epoxy off of. But now that I have a system, I'm thinking I could do all 3 of them in a day. And hopefully I have the more aggressive paper. I have 2 of the interface pads. I should have everything I need. So if we have a good dry day over the weekend, maybe I'll try to get them all done. But then the other thing that's coming up this weekend as we record is the Long Island Woodworkers Show is this Saturday and Sunday. So I'm going to try to sneak off to that. So if I do that, maybe I will do this. So I don't know. And I still have a fence to do. But that's where things stand in this shop.
Okay. Well, for me, not much is going on. I finished up the stools, the prototype stools, and my quote-unquote client. I think I'm going to meet him next weekend, and he's going to take a look, decide what he likes. But Besides that, I finished those, and I really haven't done much. I've been working. I mean, I work incredibly slow, but I've been in the shop pretty much every weekend for about boy, it seems like 6 months or so.
Yeah,
Uh,
you really rocked through those prototypes. You say you work
yeah,
slow, but I thought you were working very fast on them.
yeah. So I just kind of take a break, I kind of cleaned the shop up and just said, I'm going to take a couple of weeks off. So, right now, of course, I think I've talked about, I want to build a P. Galbert's rocker that I have the plans for. I need to start, uh, getting ready for that. But before I do that, I'm probably going to make some Christmas presents. It's been a couple of years since I've made Christmas presents for family and friends. So I think I'm going to do that. I'm trying to decide what I want to do. And I think I'm going to do, because I need to improve my lathe skills. I think I'm going to do those, the little round lidded boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about doing that.
How many do you have to make?
Probably about 4 or 5.
Oh, okay, that's not too
Yeah.
bad. Especially a
Yeah,
training
it's not.
project. You could knock that
Yeah, and
out.
plus I think it'll help improve my skills with the skew and whatnot. So, um, but that's what I think I'm going to do now. I could always just bail and decide not to do anything like I did last year. But we'll see how that goes.
You and me both, buddy. That's been my
'Cause I don't know if y'all
scapegoat.
saw. Yeah, I thought about. I don't know, a few months ago in Popular Woodworking magazine, Chris Schwartz had a little book stand that had like little copper rivets in it. I don't know if y'all saw that. They kind of folded up and then you
Mm-mm.
fold it, and that looked pretty neat. I was thinking about doing that, but I think the little lidded boxes would be better. I mean, the little book stand, that would be pretty cute. And if I'm a total failure with making the loaded boxes, I think that's my backup. So Sean, what about you?
Oh, in between seasons, because water polo season stopped, lacrosse indoor season is happening, and swim season started. Um, I did actually take a day this last weekend to finally finish the siding on my son's room. So while
excellent.
barely woodworking, it's almost done. I still need to paint the corner because I have wood corners. I got to paint those so they don't rot, and caulk and everything. But I got the final wall done. No, there was the most well. Besides, there's no windows on that one, but there was a stairway to go up, so it was a little more complicated to get around it. But got
Okay.
that done finally. And just stupid vinyl siding, so it's actually fairly simple. It was just an afternoon's worth of work that I needed to finish it up.
Hmm.
But thankfully, it's done though.
Cool.
Excellent.
So Zach, what's going on in your shop?
Oh man, I have been busy lately. Pretty much since I got back from the SWAT wood turning symposium, I have been just trying to get on top of orders. The fall season comes and people need pen blanks because they're making pens and stuff for Christmas presents. And so been trying to kind of keep up on my regular stock, like the pen blank stuff, but I've also started adding I never really used to make larger blanks. And I bought a ton of burl, and I'm doing a bunch of hybrid, larger, size blanks, like sphere blanks, lidded boxes, that kind of stuff. So I've just been trying to knock them out, get things. I'm still a little bit behind, but just kind of keep making things. And so just lots of resin casting. Pretty much that's what I do day in and day out. Making blanks.
Well, maybe I need to check that out because I need some blanks.
Nice, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Fill more orders in.
That's right.
What he wants.
I need more orders. Yeah.
I think I better make a couple of lidded boxes before I start getting too fancy with them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Never made one before.
Right?
Yeah.
It's fun turning the hybrids. I'm a big. It's funny because when I was, really just a woodworker,
Mhm.
it had to be everything had to be wooden. I mean, I didn't even like brad nails,
Yeah.
And then I kind of got into this resin stuff, and now I'm kind of like, man, I mean that, I love the grain in wood, but I'm like, it needs a little color. Put some glitter in there, make some bling in it, like it just, I don't know. That's just what I kind of tend to lean towards at this point.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, having fun.
Yeah.
Do you,
Kate,
when you're,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Zach, when you're doing the blanks for this time of year or at all, are you making basically just the stock blanks you want to make and listing them for sale, or do you do custom blanks?
I don't really do custom work. I gotta be honest, it's it's a lot of communication, like
Mm-hmm.
time spent trying to figure out what somebody wants. And then it's also kind of stressful. I don't like it when, when I have work to do. I'd rather just make it and then say, do you like it? Buy it, kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
like put pictures up. And what I'm doing now is Instagram videos. So I'll just kind of show the blank off and you can see the entire thing and then just say, hey, this one's available now. The regular stock stuff that I make, though, the most of the pen blanks, I just keep those in stock. So I just have, a lot of them are like team color blanks, and so I just
Okay.
keep them stocked up, and that's just kind of, like a machine in a sense. And then these bigger and different blanks that I'm doing now are just one off. I do some custom things, but like I said, the custom work that I do is for videos. I'll do some kind of crazy project and then I'll do a video on it, but I'm generally not really going to be making more of them.
Okay.
So not a lot of custom work typically. If somebody, unless it's like super easy. One of the problems that I have is if somebody has something very specific in their head, it is impossible to get it perfect, like
Right.
exactly how they want it.
Yeah.
They can tell me, they can show me pictures of colors and all this other stuff, but it just, I find that it's hard to really get exactly what somebody wants in their head to be made. So I just find it easier to kind of, I enjoy it a lot more just getting kind of creative with it and then saying, do you want this one here? This is what it is. Does this fit what you want, kind of thing? Makes things a lot easier.
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Casey, what's going on in your shop?
So in my shop, I've been doing a lot of similar things to Zach in the regards that I make pen blanks primarily as well as kind of like a main inventory. But the main thing that's different with my pen blanks is I do a lot of hybrid pen blanks, primarily with grapevine. So I've been making a lot of those to kind of just keep them in stock. But also similar to Zach, I've been making a lot of kind of just we call them blocks, which can kind of be turned into anything. They could be turned into, an orb, a knife handle, cut into pen blanks still, other things like that. And so I've been doing a lot of those. I also got a pretty large shipment of some maple burl in recently that I've been cutting up into smaller chunks to dry, and then started cutting some of the ones that have already been dry into smaller sizes so that I can stabilize them for knife scales. So kind of just a lot of processing and just a lot of kind of I don't know really what to call it, like recurring work. I'm kind of doing the same processes over and over, but I've been kind of throwing in some of those blocks that Zach was talking about, where you kind of just make one for fun and you don't really have to focus on a specific style, just to kind of mix it up. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been up to lately, and it's been a lot of fun.
Now, is most of your work making blocks and blanks to sell to people, or are you then turning those into finished turned goods to sell to people?
So the first, I'm primarily making blocks or pen blanks for people to turn into other things. I originally started myself making pens. I started making them out of wine barrel staves. That was kind of my niche, and then that led me to want to make pens and other things out of grapevine, which kind of led me down the road of learning about resin and how to do all that.
Cool. So both of y'all mentioned burl. So is that are y'all sourcing that local to y'all?
No, I get it from various places, usually online. There's like wood. Some of the lumber dealers sell it now. They're stocking it because it's. I have a feeling. I mean, I never really noticed it when I was just doing woodworking and I would be buying lumber from like, all the different sources for just lumber. But I have a feeling that with the kind of how it's been picking up with this hybrid and resin and resin and wood kind of movement. I have a feeling that they're kind of getting smart and just stocking it now.
Oh,
So that's one place. Some of the big kind of commercial things, but it's just most of the time I know people kind of on Facebook that sell and they're just kind of processing wood and stuff like that. So I just kind of, whenever I find somebody that's got something, just kind of contact them, see what kind of deal I can get, and then try and get. Lately, I've, to be honest, I never really got into just hybrid blanks that much. I was doing kind of weird stuff too. I got into the whole blank making thing using sagebrush because that's the Nevada state flower, and so that's how I got into this whole thing. And I was doing that kind of thing in pine cones, and I didn't really go into the hybrid thing at first. And I'm kind of doing it backwards because a lot of people kind of get into it that way and then branch off into weird stuff. I just went straight for weird. And then now I'm kind of like, I think I'm going to start making some of these things. It's really fun dye stabilizing stuff. I really like, adding color to the wood through the stabilizing process, then adding resin to it. So now I'm buying, not a ton of it, but I mean, pretty big, batches, orders of it now. So wherever I can find it, basically, at a reasonable price.
Yeah, I just wondered because where y'all are located, but because my lumber dealer stocks burl, but boy, is it expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not that much around here.
No, I wouldn't think so.
Pine stuff. Now Oregon is pretty close though. There's a lot up in Oregon, and then Casey's over in California, so he's got a little bit more access, but. There's not that much lumber like burl wood and stuff around you, is there, Casey?
No, there's really not. I mean, similar to you, I get all of my stuff online, and I feel like the only time I see burl in a lumber yard, which is rarely, at least for me, it's still in like slab form, and I think that's not what Zach and I would ever really be using. We'd be using the smaller kind of burl cap part. And those are a lot cheaper because the large majority of woodworkers don't use them. Right. So they're kind of like the scraps that we go after.
Okay, that makes sense.
I was a little more interested in the wine barrel staves. Are you in wine country that those are just tossed on the side of the road, or?
Yeah, so somewhat. So
like I could find a pallet here or there. You just happen upon a wine barrel.
Yeah, so I am from wine country, and I'm also currently going to school in wine country. So I'm from Sonoma County, which is right by Napa County, like Napa Valley area in Northern California. And now I'm going to school in San Luis Obispo County, which is where like Paso Robles, Atascadero, Arroyo Grande, if you've ever heard of those areas. So back home, my parents actually design and build wineries, and so some of their clients that were just asking my dad if he ever wanted some wine barrels, and so he had like a ton in our basement, basically as decor, and some of them had some wine in them. But when I first started turning pens, I figured, well, I could just see if this works, and basically to answer your question, it's really easy to get them. And that's kind of how I started with it.
That's really cool.
When you turn a pen from a wine barrel stave, I absolutely appreciate the story and the nostalgia and the attraction. But ultimately, if you were to just pick up the pen, could you tell it was from a wine barrel stave? Does any of it visually transfer over, or is it ultimately just a turned piece of wood?
No, you can absolutely tell. So,
it's got staining,
right? for one, exactly, for that specific reason. So whenever I would turn a pen or a bottle stopper or a corkscrew or whatever I was making, if I couldn't retain the red wine stain, because that was something I forgot to mention, is I'm only using red wine barrels. So they have a pretty significant stain in them. If I can't get a significant stain in the finished product, which I usually was able to every time, it wouldn't be good for me, because that's you like you're saying, if you turn that off, it's essentially just oak, and it looks pretty boring. But if you kind of have the red, it also looks kind of cool because there's different color variations, and it kind of messes with the wood a little bit. And anyway,
that's pretty neat.
I could see that it was the staining would really add a uniqueness to what would otherwise be a very pedestrian looking pen.
Absolutely.
Or a blank, I guess. I mean, you could certainly turn an interesting pen out of a basic wood, but it adds to the wood.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. So, before we get on to our main topic, let's take a little detour on things that piqued our interest since our last episode. So, Dyami, I think you have something that you've been, I guess, using and want to tell folks about.
Yeah, the nice folk over at Bora sent me some of their relatively new parallel clamps.
Mm-hmm.
And I used them. I used them gluing up the second blank for a headphone rack because I didn't have enough projects going in the shop.
Is it because the first one something happened to it?
No. The first one is
Yeah.
I'm going to go off a tangent here, but the first one is mostly done. But
Mhm.
what I think I'm going to do, I was always going to make two. And honestly, Sean, this is so old that it was just when it was just you and I was going to send one to you and keep one for myself.
Oh.
But now neither of us are getting them. So I was always going to make two, but what I think I'm going to do now is make them into one headphone rack. It's going to be like desk mounted, so I still have to make. I'm thinking like a table lamp, it's going to lift up by about 16 inches above the desk surface, and then have two headphone racks on it, so it could be placed on a desk.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is sanded and shaped and all ready to go in terms of a wall mount design. It's everything but finish on it. The second one is still in very rough form. I have to do all the shaping to it still. It's only been bandsawed so far. And then I have to design some sort of a pole or a vertical and upright that comes between them or above them. Or I don't know what I'm going to do. I want it to be curvy, but besides that, I don't know. And then I need to kind of carve them into all flowing so it looks like it's kind of one piece.
Okay. So please tell me it was like a 60-inch parallel clamp you were using for this.
No, they were nice enough to send me 12s because that's the size I needed.
Okay.
Turn
it.
Yeah. So, to get back to the Bora clamp, it's a good clamp. I have the original Bessies. I have the Bessie Revos. I have Jurgensens. I have Jets, and I have the Bora. I hate the Jurgensens because the wood handle is just too slippery. The Jets are nice, a little clunky sometimes, but they're very nice. The Bessies are fantastic. The Revos are, except the head slides around too much. And the Boras are kind of a mix between them all. They're not the smoothest clamp I own, but they adjusted easily enough. The handle is easy to grip and turn. They're a very functional clamp, and I should have the price point in front of me, and I don't. I'm sorry, but I believe they're
up. A 12-inch is $37 on Amazon,
which is competitive with everybody else. It's not
I think
competitive
so.
with
It's not super expensive. It's not super cheap. It's right there.
Exactly, and at that price, I'm going to say that they're probably a good value. I don't. There's none of them are perfect. Is the unfortunate thing, and I think they kind of hit the sweet spot in most of the situations, and they're absolutely going to get the job done. So, I like them.
Yeah, I have the Jet parallel clamps, and they served me. Yeah, they served me well for a number of years, but I got a few of them that are starting to slip.
Really? Even with that trigger and the locking mechanism?
Really?
Yeah. I mean,
I've had some of their F bodies start to slip, but not the parallels.
Yeah, the parallels, like if I'm clamping something up, I'm use a little trigger, move it up, and then I'll start tightening it up, and I'll start getting tight, and then all of a sudden it'll loosen up and slip back. And I need to call them, and it's been on my to-do list for I don't know how many months, and just see, if they have a solution for that or not. I found I can stop that slipping, but I actually have to bear down on the handle. So as I'm twisting the handle, I also have to push it down.
Yeah, so it's got a little cam action. That little thing tilts a little bit as it's driving down.
Yeah, something's not. And I just had like one or two of them that were doing it, and now I have like 3 or 4 that are doing it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
The bar for the Jets has little teeth in it. Are those teeth maybe filled with glue or resin or something?
No. Yeah, I thought about that, but I'm pretty. I wax them, and then if I'm doing glue where glue might get on the might get on the clamp, I also put, some clear tape down.
Oh, you're
And-
much better than I am.
Yeah, and well, yeah, but then I thought, well, maybe it's the clear tape, maybe it's that adhesive in the tape or something. So
Could be
you
the
know,
wax.
yeah,
Could be
so
the wax.
yeah, so I cleaned them all down with, brake cleaner to get.
Jesus.
Hey, I got
Might have
some
been the
really
brake cleaner.
If you really want to, I have some great brake cleaner. It's I forgot what the brand name is, but I bought a case of it because it will clean anything, but it will not strip paint off. So
Wow.
yeah, so
I just had this image of Kyle
Yeah.
like gingerly taking a bit of paraffin wax and just kind of rubbing it over. Just like, come on, work smooth. And then in the opposite, it's just like angrily just shooting brake cleaner out and going,
Exactly,
clean off,
exactly.
damn it.
But yeah, I have not been able to solve that problem. But like I said, I don't want to throw Jet under the bus just yet. I need to give them a call and talk to their folks up there and see if, because I don't think, if it's just one clamp doing it, but now I got 3 or 4, this has to be a problem they've seen before. So maybe there's a simple solution to it.
Mm.
At least I hope there is.
When you guys are doing resin casting and turning and whatnot, do you need clamps at all?
Not well, yeah. If you're gluing glue blocks on,
Okay.
sometimes, yeah. I still use clamps. Actually, I had to use some clamps today. I was making a mold. Got to clamp everything together and then screw it together. So yeah,
Yeah,
I don't do a whole lot of. I got a lot of clamps because I used to be pretty hardcore woodworking. So I got a lot of clamps. I even have like the 100-inch ones, or I don't know. They're huge, the jet parallel ones. So I'm
Okay.
pretty stocked up, and they don't get a lot of use at this point. But every once in a while, yeah, sometimes.
When you feel like getting rid of them, I'll pay shipping.
Yeah. No
I know
way.
those
Those
100
things are
clamps
so
are probably heavy.
expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So expensive.
Mm-hmm. Just looking a little deeper into those Boras at the 12-inch, they're $37. And I know, like when I originally got my jets, I did like the cabinet door pack or whatever. It was like 224s and 212s or however that worked out. The price goes up very minimally. The 24s and 31s are $2 different. The 40s are only $47.
So I guess the bigger ones, it's a much better value.
Yeah, your
much better.
your 24s are a much better value than the 12s, and hardly too big for.
I bought a bunch of those cabinet sets probably from Bessie and from Jet because they're a good deal on the clamps.
Yeah,
I can't say I've ever used those blocks to clamp up like they show it, like doing a door.
Yeah. No,
No, never use mine either.
those are in the bottom of a cabinet, just collecting dust. Just don't use.
Or the
those
little
cross
jet.
racing.
The jet ones come with the little things for dog holes too.
Oh, yeah,
I
the little
use
black
that.
bars. Yeah.
Yeah, I never use that either.
I've got dog holes. I've just never thought of using them.
I use those actually.
Okay.
I have one of the Festool MFT tables, and I've used those things a lot actually.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
What do you clamp up in them?
I don't know. Lots of things. It's nice because you can open and close them one-handed at that point, and they're not moving around, and so square things work pretty good. Picture frames and different things like that. I think I've used it for.
I got to make some frames, hopefully in time for Christmas. Maybe I'll give them a try.
Yeah, it's probably just one of those things that, hey, they're there, but I never think about using them. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I came across a couple of things that I thought were interesting. One is anyone that owns a Rikon bandsaw. Rikon just
Scott Meek.
Yeah, I do. I own one. But they just came out with kind of an upgrade kit for the motor. You can get a DVR motor for that. I think you might know the DVR motor. Nova has both a lathe and they have that drill press that's very programmable. So basically, Rikon has this kit that'll retrofit a bunch of their bandsaws. $600, so it's not cheap, but you get that DVR motor, which you can you can preset it for any speed. So they actually have various speeds for cutting wood, like if you're doing like scroll cutting versus resawing or anything like that. So you can actually program the speed, and they have some preset speeds that they've tested that they think work best. But even in that, you can vary the range if you think it should be faster or not. But what I thought was interesting is they also have speeds for cutting non-ferrous metal, but also ferrous metal. So you can cut cast iron, regular steel, things like that with this. And also they have speed settings for plastics. So yeah, so I thought that was really interesting.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
I was. My question was going to be, why do I need to change the speed of my bandsaw? Because I tend to only cut wood on it. But I guess it probably really increases the versatility of the bandsaw if you want to use mixed media.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought it was a great idea. Like I said, $600 is $600, but I mean, to get that kind of functionality out of your bandsaw is really great. And I think it's really great that you're able to put this kit on a variety of their bandsaws. And golly, my bandsaw is probably almost 10 years old, and this kit will work on it. So
it begs the question: does it only work on their bandsaws?
Of course it does. Who knows?
They've got some unique shaft or something that is
probably unique bolt hole pattern or something. I don't know, but yeah. I don't know if you could use it on another bandsaw. I'm sure once the thing goes on sale, somebody might try to retrofit it onto another make or model of bandsaw. But these are like for the 14-inch bandsaw, so it'd be something in that range, I would assume.
At that price, I mean, is that almost the price of the 14-inch bandsaw?
It's
from Raycon.
I think $700-800 is their cheapest one.
Yeah.
But I mean, you don't get that kind of functionality as far as
and that's kind of cool. And that's the DVR just means that it's electronically variable, right? I mean, that's and
it also senses a load, so it keeps a constant cutting speed. It's not just it spins it at 1200 RPMs. It under load it will continue to spin it at 1200 RPM. So it senses the load. So I think that's what's great about it. So
it's basically a giant brushless motor. It's electronically controlled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This kit comes not only with the control box that presets that does the speed, but also with a new motor. So I'm sure the motors are different. But yeah, it seemed like a pretty interesting thing, especially if you're cutting a bunch of mixed media.
Kyle, will they now
hybrid blanks? Just saying.
Yes.
I don't
Resin
know if you'd have to change it
and
much.
Pine cones.
I just use my wood one. I don't know if it would change a whole lot.
What if you knew that just a few bits of torque less or RPMs less was just the sweet spot to make it a little better cut?
Just a few.
I don't know. If I had a Raycon bandsaw, then maybe.
See,
I'd be seriously thinking about it then.
Honestly, they'd be foolish if this didn't work with everybody, or at least a certain size.
Yeah,
like any 14-inch saw could use a motor this power rating, whatever. Why wouldn't it?
I'll have to see if I can hook it up to my 1929 Delta.
Yeah. Well,
awesome.
Of course you can.
And you might get a better price break probably in a few months when they actually introduce it onto a saw. You can buy
going to be my
standard saw or the one with this motor on it.
Will they be making new saws that just come with this from the factory?
Yeah, I would assume so. That'd be crazy not to.
Yeah, I mean, this is a available soon kind of thing. I'm guessing that they'll have that as well.
Yeah, and like I said, I heard on a video they mentioned $599, but also I saw a flyer where it was $629, so it's $600 price range, I imagine, for the upgrade kit. But yeah, I'm sure they're going to have different models of saws. Oh, you can buy the basic saw for $700, or you can buy the one with the upgraded motor and the DVR controls for $1,200, or who knows what that price point would be. But yeah.
Now, when you guys are cutting up blanks, is it bandsaw or table saw work, or do you use them both, or what do you use to cut up? I'm assuming you don't glue the blanks up in the tiny little pen size shapes, do you? You're gluing bigger pieces and ripping them down to be pen size.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what I do specifically is for pen blanks. They usually typically come out as like a rectangular block, and those I'll cut on the table saw because it's pretty easy because they're going to be square.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm cutting a larger block that's, a lot taller, like it's more of like a rectangular block, and I want to cut like thin strips for knife scales if people are going to be turning it into like a knife handle, that I'll definitely use the bandsaw for. And that's definitely a lot trickier because the bandsaw usually will cut it and have a lot of strings coming from it, but usually most of the cutting I'm doing is on the table saw.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm kind of the same way. The only other thing, I have a saw stop, and if I have metal in the blanks, a lot of people are like, oh, put it in bypass mode, and I bought it so that it didn't bypass.
Right.
And I got to be honest, at this point, I don't know where the key is, so it doesn't have bypass mode. So if there's any metal in it, I always just do it on the bandsaw. But other than that, same thing. As long as it'll fit in the table saw, I usually cut it on that. And then weird things, resawing and stuff like that, I do on the bandsaw.
Is it ever a case on those blanks where there's such economy that you don't want to take such a wide curve from the table saw that you could save on a bandsaw? No, I mean
well, okay, yeah. I actually have an example. I actually used the bandsaw tonight to cut. I had a 1 3/4 square by about 6.5 inch long blank, and I wanted to cut bottle stoppers out of it. And I actually took it over to the bandsaw just to kind of save a little bit and make sure I could get a little bit over 2 inch long bottle stopper blanks out of this thing. Mm-hmm. So kind of, but not typically. I like the cut from the table saw so much better because it's way smoother.
Okay.
I don't have to sand it or do anything to make it look decent or be able to see it. So I'm if I can do it on the table saw, I'd much rather.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm definitely in the same boat as Zach on that, especially with the pen blanks, since Zach and I both are cutting so many of them. It's so much better. I'm sure Zach will agree with this, that to sacrifice the little bit of kerf you're going to lose to have a consistent smooth cut every single time. Because when you're cutting 100 of these or so, you don't want to have to spend another hour or two at the belt sander making it flush.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, before we get to our main topic, one more thing that I noticed, I'm sure all of y'all saw this on an email if you're signed up for it, is Woodpecker has a new slab flattening mill. This was kind of interesting in the fact that everyone's seen these carriages to flatten slabs. Usually, there's some sort of, jointed boards on either end and a router sled. So Woodpeckers has actually taken this and, made it all out of, anodized aluminum, and the sled looks very neat. It's nothing you couldn't make yourself, but if you were in a semi-production where you're just going through slabs, this looked like a pretty interesting thing for someone that's doing some production work. It is pricey. It's I think $700 to $900 depending on which size you need. But for once, I know we've given woodpeckers a hard time the last couple of podcasts on some of their one-time tools, but for me, this looked interesting if you were in that business. It's not something that I would buy, but I thought it was really interesting to take, what a lot of people kind of cobble together to flatten a slab and actually, make, something that's really accurate. And I don't know. That's just my opinion on it.
I'm inclined to agree. It looks like everything with woodpeckers. It looks incredibly well made and probably very over-engineered and probably works like a charm. And I guess if you're working with big slabs, the damn slabs are so expensive that an expensive jig to flatten them is probably not cost prohibitive if you're going to do multiple slabs. It's not something that's in my everyday workflow, and I'm not selling most of my work, so I can't justify the price point.
Exactly.
But if you were doing it routinely, I bet you this works nicer than most of the homemade ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it caught my eye too. I want to do one of those resin river tables sometime soon.
Mhm.
And I was like, huh, I looked at it. I didn't actually look at the price though. I think the price I would have been like, yeah, probably not. But it is. I made one of those little kind of slab flattening kind of jig things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's okay. That's why it kind of caught my eye. I was like, huh, I wonder what that's. And I didn't get a chance to like actually look into it. I'm looking at it now. It's pretty nice looking.
Yeah.
It
Yeah, I
looks
mean,
awesome because I know the finagling of those things is how to get it perfectly level, perfectly parallel, so that the thing is sliding evenly. And yes, you can do it on 2x4s, but how smooth are the 2x4s and all that stuff. So I mean, I've seen setups. When we were in Iowa at Wood, the guy using the what was that thing? A hand planer, a power planer.
Yeah, he had the big Triton
Makita?
makes that
Triton.
monster one.
Well, it wasn't Triton, but
No, he had the Triton one.
was it Triton? Okay.
Yeah, Makita makes one also, but he had the Triton one because the Triton one's like a third the price of the Makita one.
Okay.
One of those power planers.
Power planers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
power planer, but he had that in a sled to flatten slabs.
Oh, that's cool.
It's
And
really
his setup,
interesting.
he was on like aluminum C channel and all this other stuff. That he was like, yeah, you can't find this stuff. I found it on a construction site, but it works really well. It's like, geez.
Thanks.
So yeah, I know, but that woodpecker's one. I mean, I think it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it, so you can actually, know, if that's the thing you're into.
Yeah.
Sure.
If I was making one, river table, I probably wouldn't do it. But if I was cranking out, 6 to 12 a year, that might pay for itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Are those all the rage right now?
Oh yeah.
Yes,
Aren't
they're
they
all
a little
rich.
overdone?
Is it the new farmhouse table? Is that what we're getting into?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. They're just cool,
They
They
really
are.
are.
They are.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll move on to our main topic. So I guess the first thing I'd like to ask each of y'all is, so how'd you get into resin casting?
You want to go, Casey?
Sure. Yeah. So I touched on it a little bit earlier, and about me making the pens from wine barrels, and then wanting to try to make some pens out of grapevine. And so I actually tried that. I was out of like a ton of pieces of grapevine, I was only able to make one pen. And it was really clear to me that if I was going to be able to actually make pens or anything out of it, I was going to need to figure out how to use resin or some other type of medium to fill in the gaps, because the grapevine is very rarely straight. It's usually cracked and hollowed in a lot of places once it's dry. And so that's pretty much what led me to start watching a lot of YouTube videos and just teaching myself the process. I mean, it's pretty cool now being in a position where I'm pretty good friends with Zach, because I literally, and so that's kind of how it all started. I originally was just making it as pens and other things, and then once they kind of gained traction and popularity, I started just making more of the blanks of them. But that's pretty much my whole story, and yeah.
So did everyone get the repeat of literally?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we're sending that to Shannon. So Zach, how did you get into resin casting?
Well, honestly, pretty similar story. I started getting into pen turning, and I wanted to make, living in Nevada, I wanted to make something local, using local materials. And there's a lot of like Douglas fir and pine trees around here, and that's about the worst thing on the planet to work with, whether it's on a lathe or anywhere. So that I was like, I don't want to do that, and so I thought, I wonder if I could turn sagebrush. And you could, I guess, maybe, but that stuff is really kind of stringy and just, it's not a tree. It's not like wood. It's more like a, plant, or it's a brush. And so it made more sense to use like smaller chunks of it. And then I stumbled upon, the resin thing. I had no clue about it. When I got started doing this stuff, it was like probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And I kind of just like I think I stumbled on it in the Pen Turners Association, International Association of Pen Turners, the IAP.com or org, no, penturners.org. And there was a whole, it's like a forum, and they had a whole resin casting chat room thing. And so I started reading about it, and I thought, I bet this resin stuff, I didn't really know what it was, It was, I'm like, okay, I guess this will hold all these little pieces together, and that way I can actually get through sagebrush. So found this guy, Curtis Seebeck. He runs turntex.com, and he had a few, this is back in the day, there was very few YouTube channels that had anything to do with, resin casting stuff for like turning or woodworking.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had a couple videos, and he's like, he was using it for prickly pear cactus.
Okay.
He's somehow he was using that, and he also started using it for mesquite wood. He's over in Texas. And so he kind of started doing it with that, and had a few videos like, this is how you do it, kind of. And I thought, okay, went out and bought me some resin and tried it out. And at that point, like I said, I was doing wood turning more and woodworking, small wood crafts on Etsy and stuff like that. And I was really into that stuff and really into woodworking in general. And when I started playing with resin, I was like, oh my God, I'm hooked. Like, you can make it any color, you can make it any shape, you can turn it into anything. And so that's kind of how I got into it. I just kind of wanted to bind some sagebrush together, and kind of started, the first few times I used it, I just started opening my eyes like, man, you could do anything with this, sky's the limit kind of thing.
Did you ever consider using the resin in more, standard furniture as opposed to turnings?
No, not really. I was going to start making some smaller, one of the big things that I was making at the time when I got started with this was ring boxes. And I'm still thinking about maybe trying that out. I think the biggest problem is it's hard to, it's a lot of work to sand up resin. If you're cutting it and shaping it and doing stuff like, I guess cutting on it, with blades or whatever, and then you have to go through and polish it to, a glossy finish, it's a lot of work. It's a lot harder than wood because you kind of, you don't stop at, 180, 220, 400. You're stopping at like 4,000, so
right.
There's a lot more work involved with that. So it's almost easier to try and cast parts in place, make a master of it, and then just make a silicone mold of something big like that. I think that would probably be an easier way to go. That's one of the nice things about resin is if you make the perfect whatever one time, if you use silicone, make a mold of it, then you just pour resin in there and it just makes copies of it. So that's kind of, I think if you were actually going to get into, larger scale stuff like that, that's probably how I would do it.
Okay. So Dyami should have made a mold of the entertainment center.
Yeah. You make a perfect one, make a mold of it, and then just pour resin in there.
Can you domino into resin?
Yeah, sure. You can do anything. It works pretty much the same as, I've seen people use, run it over the joiner.
Really?
I didn't.
Yeah.
The biggest difference I would say is, wood, there's a lot of air inside of wood. It's grain, and there's air space in there, so it's not solid surface. And I think the biggest difference is, especially like if you're a wood turner, going from turning wood to turning resin products or plastics or anything like that, it seems slower. It's like sluggish because the tool is actually cutting probably twice as much actual material off because there's no airspace in the middle. So I'd say that's the only difference. But yeah, you can route it. You can, obviously sand it, turn it, cut it. I use the same blades that I used for woodworking on everything.
Do you need any specialty tools for the resin? Well, let's talk about the casting of it in a minute, but just in terms of the cutting and the shaping and the sanding, is it all woodworking tools, or do you need any special ones specifically for resin?
For the most part, I don't have any specialty tools. The only thing that I would say might be specialty is Easy Wood Tools came out with a negative rake cutter for their carbide cutters, and that works a lot better when you're turning it. It's just less aggressive, so you don't get chipping and stuff like that. So that's the only thing that I can think of. Can you think of anything, Casey?
No, I can't. I can't either. And I mean, they only came out with that product, what, Zach, like a month ago or two, maybe. And so, yeah. So up until then, there literally was no specialty product, really.
Yeah, I heard y'all mention that. I listened to your podcast, I guess, a couple of podcasts ago, where you went into a bunch of these topics that were asked, and one of them is, do you need any special tools? But tell me a little bit about the negative rake. So exactly what have they done to that carbide cutter that's different from the typical one?
Well, so a normal one is just like a flat piece of carbide. The top is flat, and then you have kind of your angle, you know, on the edge. And so what they've done is the negative rake puts a negative downward angle right at the tip.
Okay.
And so it's kind of, a lot of people, what they would do is with the normal cutters is they would lift them up so that it's angled down off the tool rest. So it's kind of already, you know, you're creating a negative angle, and it's just less aggressive. If you were pointing that up, that's going to be more aggressive. It's going to want to dig in more. And so they just kind of, the problem with holding the tool like that is it's completely awkward. It's not comfortable. And Carl Jacobson was one of the people that did that a lot, and he's sponsored by Easywood Tools, and so I think they just saw him doing that all the time, and were like, we should probably come out with a new product so you don't look like an idiot when you're turning. No, so they work together on it, and it just, I think there's two things. Like I said, holding a carbide tool like that, the way that you want to turn with a carbide tool is you're generally going to hold it level, horizontal, and you want to hit that right at the turning blank right at this like center point, the midpoint. That's going to be the best way to cut. So that's what they kind of tell you to, the kind of thing that you want to do when you're turning with those. If you're using high-speed steel scrapers, they've already had negative rake cutters. Like that's been a thing in wood turning for a long time, is just kind of taking and giving a negative rake on that top angle just to kind of make it a little bit less aggressive. And that's what I was using. I was just using high-speed steel tools a lot more than carbide with a negative rake on it anyway. And when I was up in Portland for the national AAW symposium, they kind of, Chris at Easywood Tools, I was doing demos for them up there, and Chris kind of pulled me over and he's like, hey, check this out. And when I saw the cutter, I was like, oh man, that is going to be a game changer, because I was already using it with high-speed steel. The difference is you got to sharpen those all the time. And some materials, especially like the really hard stabilized stuff, there's some things that just completely just tear up high-speed steel. I mean, you're going to be sharpening literally after every cut. And so that's when back in the day, that's when I would pull out carbide. If I knew I was going to be at the grinder more than I was turning, I would just pull out carbide, but it can be difficult if it gets kind of catchy, And so when they showed me that, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to be using those things a lot. And it just makes turning more fun. One of the areas that I had that I struggled with, and this is when I was looking at those new cutters, this actually was the first thing that I thought of. When you're hollowing, if the tool grabs inside of something, like where you're hollowing out like a bowl, I'm thinking more like a jar or like a hollow form. Okay. If you get a catch, or if it grabs inside there, that's like, I got to go change my shorts kind of thing. Like just, I hated it. I didn't like doing it by hand. And I even went and bought one of those like articulated snake arm things where it held it in place, just because it was less likely to grab, because it was held in place on two axes. You just kind of moved it. And now that they have those negative rake cutters, I mean, you can hollow with one hand. Like they're just so not aggressive that you can, you have so much more control, and it makes it more fun. You're not worried about, is the tool going to grab on the resin? You're just working on the actual cutting action. yeah, I mean, at this point I can just get lost just hollowing by hand on stuff. It's fun,
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of changes, the way it all works. Like I said, I think it makes it a lot more fun when you're not worrying about, is the tool going to catch?
I would
Just
think so.
focusing on the
Sure.
project at the end.
I just picked up my easy wood tools. I've got one of the big roughers, the old
Oh, yeah.
CI1, and just
Mhm.
looking at it, looking at a picture online, like, what is it? Oh, okay, I see what it's doing. I'd have to use it to know the difference, I guess.
Yeah, no, it does. It's not going to help. It's not. I wouldn't recommend the negative rake ones for wood.
Okay.
They don't. It doesn't work that way. Maybe on some of the like super dense hardwoods, it maybe might help out a little bit, but it's actually too little aggressive. It's not aggressive enough for that. You want to actually have a little bit more aggressive cutter when you're just doing normal wood turning. But like I was saying, with the resins though, there's more material there, and the cutting edge tends to kind of grab into it a little bit sometimes. And if you end up getting, I don't know, putting the tool in, like feeding it in too fast or moving it side to side too fast,
Mhm.
a lot of times with those regular cutters, it'll grab in, and you get this. It basically just like tears it up, and it grabs on it, and it's basically like getting a catch if you're wood turning.
Yeah.
If you go the wrong way with the cutting blade, it'll catch and it scares you. But with the negative rate cutters, I mean, at this point I don't know anybody that actually uses those that has gotten like that catch. I
Really?
haven't. Yeah, like it totally eliminates it. Actually, a
Mhm.
funny story. Heath Knuckles was doing a demo for them in Portland in I think it was June this year, and we're at the Easy Wood Tools booth, right? So of course we're using Easy Wood Tools to turn. Heath had never picked up a carbide tool before in his life, and he's doing a live demo at their booth, right? And I'm kind of like, okay, we'll see how this goes. And even I was like, I don't use them that much at that point. I wasn't using them as much as I was like high speed steel tools. And so I even did a little bit of practicing before this demo, and I'm like, okay, just make sure that I got everything down, and everything's gonna go good. So Heath gets up there, and they're like live streaming on Easy Wood Tools Facebook page, and he gets a catch on it was hilarious. And then like right after the demo, then they're like, oh yeah, we're coming out with these new easy, negative rake things. And I'm just like, why didn't you give that to Heath the first time? Like you should have launched it before this, So it was kind of funny that happened. And then they're like, oh, and we came up with these cutters that don't catch. And I'm like, yeah, I bet Heath would have liked that 5 minutes ago. So pretty good product.
Yeah, sounds great. So what do you mainly use? Easy wood or uh, your regular turning tools, or is it like half and half, or
Well,
depends
since they
on what
came
you're
out with the
doing?
new cutters,
Yeah.
I pretty much use those, the EasyWood Tools ones. I did product testing for them, so it
Mhm.
was kind of this whole secret between June and August whenever they released them,
Yep.
and they when they showed them to me, they're like, hey, we want you to do some testing and see if you can find any problems. Maybe make some blanks that are, I don't know, more difficult to
Mhm.
turn. And so they sent me a bunch of tools to do the testing with, and it was interesting because like I said, I didn't really use carbide that much for a lot of different things. And that testing forced me to use carbide tools for all kinds of things. And what I actually found out was on pen turning, I actually get a smoother surface using carbide at this point. And which means less sanding.
Right.
So it was just one of those things where I'm like, there's certain things where I'm going to pull out, like the parting tool. Easy Wood Tools does have a parting tool, but it's not. It has to be used a very specific way. So I still have high speed steel tools for certain things. If I'm turning wood, I'm certainly gonna, if I'm like turning a wood bowl, I'm pulling out a bowl gouge. It's gonna work. But for a lot of things, if it's resin, I'm pretty much using carbide for most things at this point.
Is that just because of dulling of random standard steel tools?
Yeah.
Steel?
Yeah, I don't have to deal with that. with sharpening, which is not a big deal. If you have like the Wolverine jig set up and all that stuff, sharpening's not really that big of a deal. But at the same time, I mean, you don't have to stop ever.
Yeah, so it's not the matter of it doing more damage to the blade. It doesn't wear down faster or anything.
No, yeah.
Because it's resin. It's just the fact that it's just you don't have to sharpen carbide as much.
Yeah, I don't have to sharpen them, and I don't know. I kind of got and like I was saying, I can kind of get a better finish at this point using carbide tools. The negative rake high-speed steel scrapers worked really well. I was getting a really good finish on those, but those you have to sharpen a lot more. That burr kind of wears down quick. So, yep.
The negative rake high-speed steel ones, they were originally made for wood and also work well for the resin? Because the negative rake carbides were specifically for the resin, right?
Yeah, negative rake carbide, that was introduced specifically for resin products. But the negative rake scrapers, it's just a scraper, and people would put it's just a high-speed steel scraper, which is a tool that a lot of people use. You can get in there and just kind of take, if you have like, let's say for bowl turning, you go in there with your bowl gouge, and if you don't have a really smooth cut surface, you can come in with a scraper and it'll just kind of finish that, smooth things out, and that negative rake would make it even less aggressive so that you could just kind of smooth surfaces out with wood. So it's a tool that a lot of wood turners turning wood use a lot, and it works great for resin too. I like them too, but they wear that specific tool compared to a gouge, I found wore down faster, and I would have to go to the sharpening a lot more. And so given the choice, if I'm looking at a high-speed steel scraper and a carbide negative rake, I'm going to pick the negative rake carbide all day.
Okay.
Just because I don't have to mess with sharpening and all that stuff.
So that's more, again, that's more of what it is. It's just less maintenance to the blade, and I can continue working.
Right. Well, and I guess the other thing, the other reason for me is I do a lot of odd materials. My thing is kind of embedding random stuff in resin, and a lot of that stuff is super hard. I mean, when you start stabilizing things, it can be really abrasive and really hard material. And at that point, I don't want high-speed steel at all, because you'd be sharp. Literally, you'd take a cut, like even on a pen blank, you would take one cut, and then you'd have to go sharpen it because that edge got dull that quick. And at that point, there's just no reason to use high-speed steel, because it's just not hard enough material. So the carbide will last longer. If you're doing something really, really hard, I mean, even the carbide's going to wear out kind of, and you'll have to, move. If it's square, you'd have to switch it to a new side or whatever, or circle. Yeah. You have to rotate them, but it's going to last probably at minimum 10 times as long as high-speed steel. I would actually say more than that,
Mm-hmm. Well, so, since we're talking about tools, maybe we should move into, so if someone was wanting to get into resin casting, I think Dyami mentioned this, what kind of setup do you need for that?
For the actual casting process.
Yeah, for the actual casting.
I've been talking a lot. You go ahead, Casey.
Okay. Yeah, so for the casting, there's a few main things you're going to need, and it's more on the equipment side, right? So you're going to need, we are pretty strong in saying that you should use pressure rather than vacuum. So I would recommend getting a pressure pot. You basically can get a pressure tank, like a paint tank from Harbor Freight or some other manufacturers, and then slightly modify it so that it just holds pressure. You need that. You need obviously the resin itself, and there's many different kinds, many different brands. So that's kind of ambiguous. And then you need, most of the resins are going to need either a scale to weigh it, or you're going to need some type of cups that can measure the volume of it. And then also, depending on what you're doing, like what you're casting, you're going to need a mold, right? So if you're doing some like figurines or something super specific, you'll probably want to go down the silicone mold route. so that you can get exactly the finished product when you take it out. Or if you're doing something that's similar to what Zach and I are doing, you're probably going to make like a block mold, whatever kind of shape that block may be, and then kind of manipulate the resin after it comes out. Obviously, with the pressure, you're going to need an air compressor to give that pressure. Is there anything else I'm missing, Zach?
Gloves.
Yeah, gloves.
Gloves, stir
Mixing sticks. Yeah.
If you want to add color, you can either use dyes or you can use mica powder type pigments.
Okay.
I'm looking at my casting area. Cups.
Yeah.
Something to mix it in.
Yeah. So any kind of dye, like we're talking like trans tin, or are we talking like maybe what you might find in paint type
No,
stuff?
most of the manufacturers have
Their own dyes
Yeah.
for that particular type of resin. Okay, gotcha.
Certain resins don't. It doesn't matter as much. Like you could use acrylic paint, I think, with polyester resin. But the thing is, some epoxies, and then Alumilite is a pretty popular brand of resin in turning, and it's a polyurethane based resin. Some epoxies and polyurethanes do not like moisture at all. Like it's going to ruin the casting. And so some dyes, like acrylic paint, is water based. That's not going to work with Alumilite. Some other types of dyes have water in them. I don't think trans tint would work.
Yeah.
I think it might have some sort of, I don't know. I've never tried it. I'm pretty sure it doesn't work with Alumilite though. I just use Alumilite dyes myself, and those work with any resin. So it doesn't matter what kind of resin. That's kind of why I just stuck with that, because I'd rather just not worry about it. The problem is if you can test it and just see if there's a reaction, with a small amount.
Yeah.
But I was kind of like, why not just not worry about it and just use these dyes,
Yeah, the only resin I've worked with is epoxy, and so I know trans tint works in that, but didn't know about that. Now, so when you're actually doing the casting, so you're doing it in this pot, I assume what's that process like? Is there some sort of liner in this pot, or I'm thinking about, you're putting liquid in here, you're putting it under pressure. After that is cured, what are you doing to remove it from the pot? Is there a release agent or something like that on there?
Yeah. So I'll kind of walk you through it to help you visualize it more. So essentially, we kind of have a rectangular block mold just made out of HDPE plastic, so that the resin doesn't stick to that. Actually, the way I describe it is that it'll cling to it, but it won't stick to it. So if you give it any type of force, it should come off. So you'll take that mold with the resin in it. And here's the part that I think will help more is we put it into a mold rack. So we basically build a little system that will hold the mold in the pressure pot so that there's going to be no spilling or anything like that. And more importantly, depending on the type of pressure pot you have, when you put air into it, you kind of have a roof over the mold, so you're not going to be spraying resin everywhere. Some pressure pots have a little diffuser at the inlet so that it shoots the air to the sides and not down, so you wouldn't have that problem anyway, but still it helps to have the roof. Definitely
first casting I ever did, it just blew the resin everywhere in my pressure pot. I was like, that's great, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to picture. You just dumping resin into the pot. What?
No, you're gonna pour your resin into a mold and then put the mold in the pressure pot. What? Now, technically, I actually don't really use those racks myself.
Okay.
But sometimes I do, but most of the time I don't. I just kind of stick it in there. The pressure pots that I use, though, have a pretty flat base. They're not very rounded or anything like that, so they pretty much just kind of go in there, and there's not really a big problem. Now, if I'm doing like a bunch, sometimes you'll kind of batch out a bunch of them, then I'll put it on a rack system so that it holds lots of them, and I can get them all in there and just pop it in one shot.
Does yours have a diffuser like on the air inlet so it shoots it to the side? Or okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Now you said you recommend doing the pressure pot instead of a vacuum. So the only really experience I have is blue spruce tools and their mallets and chisel
Yep.
handles that are, and I think he uses a vacuum to get the resin into the wood. But I just wondering what's the difference there?
Well,
Uh,
the difference
I assume
there
there's
is
a big cost difference, but
there's
besides that,
yeah, that's stabilizing resin. There's a
okay.
difference between resin casting and stabilizing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing stabilizing, what you're doing is you're forcing resin into the inside of the wood,
Right.
kind of like think pressure treating in a sense, like pressure treated lumber. It's the only difference is when most of us the way that we do the stabilizing process, we actually do it opposite of pressure treating. We suck all of the atmosphere out of the chamber and air, and then when you reintroduce it and you got your wood submerged under this resin, and then when you reintroduce the atmospheric pressure, it basically forces that resin where the air was, and so it fills it from the inside out. So that's kind of the wood stabilizing process. And the other difference with stabilizing resin compared to casting resin, casting is going to be you're going to add part A and part B, mix it up, and then it's going to harden over time. Stabilizing resin needs to be baked to cure, so it's going to cure at a certain temperature. It's a very thin liquid. Almost kind of looks like gasoline or something like that. I guess in a sense, it's very, very thin liquid, and you want it to be really thin so that it penetrates into the wood as best as it can. And then when you pull those out, you'll kind of dry off the excess. The atmospheric pressure's holding that resin kind of inside the wood, and then you pop it in the oven at about 200 degrees, and then you got it basically plasticized, kind of like I said, kind of similar to sort of like pressure treating, filling those inner gaps with resin rather than air. And so at that point, moisture doesn't really, you don't have the wood movement issue. That's why blue spruce is using that type of wood. It keeps, even if you went from like the desert to, like a tropical jungle, moisture really can't penetrate that much into the wood. It can a little bit still, but not like like a totally open piece of wood where moisture is just going to get soaked into it and then change the properties of it.
Right. Now, in terms of that, the stabilizing resin, is there any two-part stabilizing that reacts chemically, or it all has to be heated to activate it?
Well, if you're doing the one that most of us kind of garage wood turners are doing, it's pretty much the same way. The only brands that I know of, you're putting it under vacuum. It's a bake to cure type resin. The only other thing that I know of personally is there is pressure. Some people do actually go the opposite direction and do pressure stabilizing. But you have to overcome atmospheric pressure. So I think you're talking like thousands of pounds of pressure to get to force that liquid in, and at that point you're literally talking pressure treating. And it's kind of a more like industrial process at that point, and so most people aren't doing that unless they're like mass producing stabilized wood, as far as I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know any two-part type things. It makes it would make it really difficult to make it a two-part thing like that. It's nice having all the time in the world until you put it in the oven.
Right.
It'll allow it to soak in longer, and some of the stuff that I do, I'm doing multiple colors, which means kind of multiple processes of that same process. And you really need, sometimes you'll let the wood soak in it for days.
Oh wow.
So that it really pulls in, and you can dye the stabilizing resin as well. So if you're coloring it, sometimes you need to, especially depending on the species of the wood and the grain and all that kind of stuff, it may have to sit in there. I know people that have let it soak for weeks trying to get a certain color.
Under vacuum that whole time?
No, not necessarily. It kind of just depends. Honestly, stabilizing's it's got a lot of art to it. It really depends. Even if you're running the same species of wood, different grain. If there's spalting in it, that can change things. Like there's a lot of differences. Just one piece of wood to another, so it can kind of, things can kind of change the way that process works. The amount of time you may need to spend doing it. But then especially if you're doing the multiple processes, I know some people that do multiple colors. And they do it a certain way where you're literally doing the entire process over and over again. And the problem is if you run it under vacuum and then bake the full amount of resin in, there's not a lot of space left in there. So you could,
right.
And then they'll do it again, and at that point you have to do it for twice as long. And so every successive color that you do has to be done like at least twice as long as the last time. And so some people run them, under vacuum for a week. That's not the way that I do it. I like to just kind of soak them in colors first, bake it in a little bit, and then run the full vacuum on the second round. Makes it a lot easier.
Okay.
Faster.
Now, we've talked in the past about the stabilizing, and I'm holding in my hands a sample of stabilized timber strand that you made for me years ago.
Yeah, have you done anything with that?
I glued it into a corner that I stuffed
Nice.
pedal car. Though I did of the similar material, I made the winning hardwood derby car.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I was about to bring that up. I thought you were holding your hardwood derby car.
No, the hardwood derby car is honestly I don't know where it was. It was in the mantle, and my wife moved it.
Mine's a doorstop, by the way.
I'm really intrigued by the stabilization process, but I would like to use it on furniture-sized pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that it has to be baked is a practical hurdle that I've needed to get over. I've kind of slowly been assembling the components to do the stabilization. I've never actually stabilized something, but in my head, what I want to stabilize are bigger pieces.
Yeah.
So I have what I think is a ridiculous idea, but I wanted to bounce it off you, Zach. And Casey too, if you do a lot of stabilization, I know I'm more familiar with Zach's stabilization. What do you think about buying a used electric stove and taking it apart and rebuilding it to be a bigger chamber?
Yeah, that would work.
Using the heating element, but otherwise
Exactly.
making it-
Exactly.
Well,
I'm sure at
well-
work I could make something out of sheet metal and fireproof insulation
Yeah.
to make the chamber itself.
What's the lowest temperature that you need to get to? I mean, can you do
Minimum?
something at
So-
like 140 degrees versus 200?
No, well, maybe.
Yeah.
It'd be tough. So what you're shooting for is the optimal temperature is like
Yeah.
185. That's
Okay.
I think what it needs to reach to cure fully. And you need to bring the entire piece to that temperature for it to start curing.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really want to go over 200 though, because at that point it can kind of start. It's too hot, and it kind of can make it bleed out more,
Mm-hmm.
which means you're just wasting, resin, and it's not as stabilized as you'd like it to be, I guess.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you're kind of shooting for that 185. Now the thing is, though, I mean,
The reason
and I don't
yeah,
really know totally, but I know that it'll also cure.
Mhm.
If it could cure in the shop in the bottle at 85 degrees as well.
Oh.
And so that's the thing that I just don't know enough about the chemistry and everything that's going on with that.
Mhm.
As far as I understand it though, for the piece, like if you're actually stabilizing a piece of wood, you really need to get the entire piece of wood, core and everything, to 185, I think is kind of the magic number.
Okay.
Yeah. The reason I asked that, Dyami, is, for steam bending parts and drying green wood, I do have a kiln.
Oh.
And it goes up, it's nothing but a glorified easy bake oven, but it's pretty big. I mean, it's 4 foot by probably 3 foot in width and depth, and probably 3 foot in height, if not more. and I can get that up to 120, but that's where that's where my thermostat cuts it off. I'll try to reset it and see if I can get it up to 185.
Well, you don't need to overcook your kiln, but that would be interesting.
It's not going to hurt anything inside the kiln, but it'd be interesting to see if I could get it up to that temperature and it would hold, because it's relatively simple to make, and you can make it any size.
Right. And I'm thinking something like the size and shape of a large steam box, like you'd use for chair making. And I have 220 in the shop, so in my head I'm thinking buy like a cheap used electric oven, and then kind of take it apart and use the components of it to make this what's essentially an oven.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
or you can get one of those. Or you can just look on auction sites and get one of those super big industrial walk-in ovens.
Yeah.
No biggie.
I'll put the finished piece of furniture right in that oven.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the whole thing.
Boom.
But then the other thing becomes I need a vacuum chamber that's big enough to do real furniture parts. So that's another hurdle to get through.
That's not too bad. The chambers that I use are made out of PVC. And so you can get any, whatever size diameter PVC, and it literally can be any length.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know guys that have like 10-foot long chambers.
You find that how do they bake what's in them if they're 10 foot?
Well,
or they just put lots of little things in them?
Yeah, they're putting lots of smaller pieces in them.
Do you find that the clear PVC or the clear vacuum chamber is necessary so you can see the bubbles and kind of play back and forth? I know when you're doing it, you're releasing the vacuum and returning the vacuum and releasing and returning to get it all sucked in all the way, right?
Well, when you first start up, once everything's, the reason you're doing that kind of on and off thing is so that it doesn't overflow.
Okay.
When you start sucking the air out, it looks like it's actually like boiling. It's kind of what it looks like in the chamber. It's actually just sucking air bubbles out, and it's just like foaming in a sense. And so these air bubbles, what ends up happening is if you have an air bubble that's, let's just say 1 unit of whatever measurement, if you put it under vacuum, it's going to grow. If you put it under pressure, it's going to collapse. It's going to shrink.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happening is all of the air bubbles in that chamber are being expanded and sucked to the top. And so the reason that you're kind of letting that valve off is you're just making sure that that resin doesn't overflow and suck into the vacuum chamber or into the vacuum pump.
Gotcha.
So once you've gotten it to the point where it's gotten enough of the air out that it's not going to keep foaming that the actual liquid part up to the top where the inlet valve is, then you want to just keep it closed completely. And reach the maximum vacuum that you can pull.
And to do that and to visibly make sure it doesn't overflow, again, do you need to be clear, or could you go with like regular schedule 40 PVC that's with solid white?
You could. I personally think that being able to see in on the sides is kind of the way to go, because the thing is you need to know where the air bubbles are actually coming from. Once once you've pulled all the air out of the wood, if there are air bubbles trapped underneath the wood and they're just kind of floating out the side of it, like out from underneath it, you're done. As long as the air bubbles aren't coming from the inside of the wood, that's when you're done. So I like being able to see in on the side. There's not a lot that you can see from the top. I don't think. I don't think it's very useful having just a top view. Personally, it's just I haven't really ever used it that way. Casey does that. You have more like the acrylic lid ones, right, Casey?
Yeah, on the two that I have that are like that, I have glass lids, and I would say it's absolutely necessary to be able to see the top. What Zach's talking about is 100% helpful, and it's correct. But you do need to be able to see. Well, I should rephrase that a little bit. If your lid is going to be within, I don't know what you would agree with, Zach, maybe like 4 to 6 inches of where you're going to be putting the resin, you should be able to see it, because the reason why you don't want it to overflow is because if it gets into the line in your vacuum pump, it can really cause some problems. But if you wanted to use a white lid and then make it a foot higher than you're ever going to fill the resin up to, you're probably going to be okay. But if you're not,
you're talking about not being able to see in at all. Is that what you're saying? Like, yeah, you definitely need to see in to see what's going on inside the chamber somehow. I like having a clear PVC pipe, like being able to see in from the sides. I don't really think that being able to see in, like a lot of people use like a pressure pot or something similar to that, just a metal pot, and then put a lid, like a glass or thick acrylic lid on it. So where you're seeing inside, but you can't see into what's going on from the side of it. What I was saying is I prefer the Turntex type chambers where it's a clear PVC pipe where you can see in the entire chamber on the sides. The lid isn't, it's not clear on that one, but I don't think that the top view is very valuable. I think being able to see in from the sides is really where it's at, is what I was saying. Personally, that's just kind of, a lot of people use the other type as well, but
yeah. No, I agree. I agree 100%. It just, what he was asking is if you could have a white PVC lid and have it be opaque. And I was saying that if you can't see through the sides, you need to be able to see a way and make sure you're not sucking cactus juice into the chamber.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah.
You need somehow you need to be able to see into what's going on.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Cool. Cactus juice. I like that.
Yeah.
It's a stabilizer, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so that brings me to the next question. So we've talked about, the tools for turning the finished product or cutting it, as well as the equipment you need to actually do resin casting. Tell me a little bit about the resin. So I'm curious about, toxicity, ease of workmanship, those type of things. I mean, do you need some special equipment? You don't have to be in a hazmat suit to do this.
No. Well, okay, so
yeah,
I see where you're going. So you need to protect yourself. Wear gloves. You don't want that stuff getting on your skin. You don't want skin contact with it. I would rate most of the epoxies and polyurethanes. I mean, it's kind of the same idea as like finishes, I would say. You don't want to drink it. You don't really want it on your hands that much, that kind of thing. I would recommend, just like every can of any chemical says, you want to work in a well-ventilated area, keep the air moving and recycling. The thing is, though, some resins are highly toxic. So, regardless of what I say, make sure you, if you're getting into resin casting, read the product safety stuff. There's always going to be safety stuff in the instructions for whatever type. If you're not familiar with it, or you just don't know for sure, read the safety stuff and it'll tell you, how to protect yourself. One of the ones, polyester resin, which is a lot of people call it fiberglass resin.
Okay.
That stuff is toxic. If I'm not mistaken, it causes brain damage with enough exposure.
Oh, good.
Ooh.
So you don't want to be huffing that, and it is absolutely horrid smelling anyway. So you don't really want to smell it, and that's one that I do not use. That was actually the first resin I ever tried, and and I'm reading the safety instructions. They're like, use in a well ventilated area, and I'm like, right, just like we always do with wipe on poly, well ventilated.
Yeah.
It
can cause cancer in every state of the union, not just California.
right. And so I'm thinking, I'm in my shop, and I'm thinking, I got really tall ceilings, it's a pretty big shop here. It's 20-foot ceilings, and I'm thinking, it's well ventilated in here. Well, one thing that I didn't really think about is my personal shop area is like we put plastic sheeting up around the two walls of it. So it's not really that well ventilated. It's not like I'm recycling air, at high rates. So I start, I crack this stuff. It smells horrid. It's like lacquer thinner, that just toxic smelling nasty. And so I'm like, that's not fun. Well, like 5 minutes into it, I'm like mixing it up and, standing there. I'm dizzy. Like I'm dizzy and I'm like, what is going on? And then I realized I looked into it more, and that stuff is really toxic. So yeah, I would well ventilated area. If you can't get your area ventilated, respirator, put a fan on. Just you don't want to be huffing that stuff. That stuff's bad for you. And there are some other resins that I've come across that have certain chemicals in them that are more toxic than others.
Okay.
And then there's also some that kind of say that they're, I don't know, good for the environment too. I don't know. I don't know how much better some of those are. It might just be marketing, but for the most part, common sense is really what you need. But there are a couple of them, and that's why I always say, make sure if you're not sure, you're not sure what product you're using, you haven't used it before, just read the safety instructions and follow them for the most part.
Yeah, and I'm sure that also goes to when you're on the lathe with these resins, and especially sanding. Make sure you're fully protected.
Yeah,
It
doesn't matter what you're sanding. You don't want to be breathing dust no matter what.
Exactly.
So yeah, yep. What was the other? You said safety, and then what was the other thing?
I like workability, work time, things of that nature. So when you're doing this, I assume these are long set resins. You're not working against the clock.
No, nope, that's not what I use. It really depends.
Okay.
Depending on the manufacturer and even per manufacturer, they usually have a bunch of different formulas. So it can depend. I mean, I actually use one of the resins that I use a lot it sets up in 2 minutes.
Ooh,
you have 2 minutes, you better be done. And that's actually the majority of the color swirl team color blanks that I make. That's what I use.
Do you do the short one so that the colors can't completely mix together and you end up with the swirls? So it sets before it blends?
No, that's not why I use it. Actually, the reason I use that one is if you just mix the part A and the part B, it turns opaque, totally opaque white.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually the first, it's Alumilite white, they call it. That was the first one that I ever started using because I'm lazy, basically. I don't like painting tubes.
Okay.
So if you're, for people that aren't into pen turning, if when you make a pen, you're going to drill out the center and you're going to glue in a brass tube in the middle. And if you have a really transparent blank, then you see this, scuff marked brass tube in there, and it's really ugly. So I found out that there was a resin that was, when it cured, it was totally opaque, like 100% opaque. And I'm like, oh, never gonna paint a tube again. It's kind of what I thought of,
Yeah.
The only downside with that one is, like I said, 2 minutes and you're done. But so I use that one, and then I also use a slower kind of, I would call it a medium setting resin that's 12 minutes.
Okay.
And then sometimes I use, actually, a couple of weeks ago on the live stream, we did one where you had 3 hours. And it had to stay in the pressure pot for 72 hours, So it really just depends. The good thing is there's a formula for whatever type of work you want to do, and some of them, like that one that was a 3-hour working time and 72-hour demold time. It was an epoxy that you could pour in very large quantities. So that there's a lot of characteristics that you can kind of go into and figure out. Most people use either kind of a slower setting, like an hour. You have about 30 minutes to an hour, and that's like most of your epoxies. Polyester resin is kind of a longer open time. And then usually there are some kind of faster setting epoxies, but Alumilite is the one that's on the faster side. They have a clear version that is, you either have 5 minutes or 12 minutes. And then they have their white, which is 2 minutes. And I got to be honest, I actually don't even recommend most people mess with that, because it's you gotta move. It's not so difficult that it's impossible. It's just what you have to do is you have to be ready. Like, you have to prepare. Everything has to be ready. You can't be like, oh, I forgot to do this part. Like, you're done. You may as well just toss it in the trash if you figure out that you need to go get the dye bottle open. So
Yeah.
preparing, if you prepare and everything's set out and you've planned accordingly, it's not really that hard. I mean, but I just here's the other problem, I guess, with that. So we were talking about the dyes, and there's also the powders for if you want to color resin.
Mhm.
The other reason I don't even recommend people use that white, the opaque one, is because you can't get pearly colors with that one.
Oh,
It's totally opaque, and those pearl colors rely on light transmission, and so
That
if there's
makes
no
sense.
light transmission, it doesn't do anything. So that's the reason why I'm kind of like, most people are gonna hate working with this being so slow, and it's very limiting. You can only use dyes, and you're gonna get solid colors. That's it. And with the clear, though, I mean, you can make opaque blanks. It's possible to, with certain dyes, make it opaque totally, or add enough of the pearl pigment. But you can do pearls. You can do totally clear stuff. You have a little bit more working time. So that's why I usually just kind of recommend people go with the clear one.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, before we get into some fun questions, one thing on equipment I wanted to ask all about is what, you mentioned doing the pressure pots. So what type of compressors are y'all using? I assume y'all are using some two-stage compressors or something like that, or maybe I'm wrong.
So the one
Yeah.
I'm using, it's nothing fancy actually. It's just
Okay.
like a normal electric compressor. I think mine is a 5-gallon.
Okay.
But the only special thing about it is because I originally had my shop in the basement of the house I'm living in, and so I originally there's a company called I think California Air Tools.
California Air, yeah. I got to buy
exactly.
one of those because, my wife, I'm sure you're going where I'm going, is my wife just kills me every time the compressor kicks off in the middle of the night.
Yeah. So I not only got that, but I also built like a sound insulation box for that specific compressor. And you really can't hear it at all, especially now that I've transferred out to like a 2-car garage where it's a lot more room. You really can't hear it. I think Zach has a lot more of a industrial one than me, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I share a shop with my dad. He's a machinist, and so he had an 80-gallon, whatever, huge compressor that we run an entire 4,000 square foot shop with. So I'm kind of not in the typical, kind of thing. So I basically just kind of plumbed lines into my area and just kind of stole off his. Now I do have a 15-gallon. Back when I was just doing woodworking and lived in Vegas, I had a 15-gallon compressor. It was nothing special, but it would have worked fine. For resin casting, I think the main thing is I would recommend getting no smaller than a 2.5 gallon, just because most of the pressure pots are 2.5 gallons, and so what ends up happening is, in some cases, depending on how strong the compressor motor is and how the volume of air that it can hold in the tank, when you're filling the tank, it's if it's too small, it's just going to be running constantly.
Gotcha.
To get it filled up. Whereas if you have at least a 2.5, like the pancake compressors, they work fine. If it's the tank's filled up, then when you're filling the pot up, most of it's just going to fill right away, and then maybe it'll kick on right at the end. But otherwise, your compressor is just going to be running all the time. I think the optimal size is that California Air Tools 5-gallon. That is it's a pretty good price. Last time I looked, I think it was on Amazon. It was like 150, 180.
Oh wow, that's
something.
That's good.
It's and it's like super quiet, like way quieter, oilless, and like 5 gallons is kind of a sweet spot, I think. You could use that for anything I can think of in a typical shop. You can run, air tools with it. You can fill up a tire. It'll work perfect for resin casting. So it's a pretty good size, and it's just one of those things that if you're gonna buy a compressor, like a lot of people ask me, what compressor should I get, or what's the minimum? And I'm kind of like, okay, well, the minimum is X, but if you're gonna spend the money on a compressor, and you actually, you're turning, you have a workshop, you actually want to do stuff, I would get get one that can do more than one thing, you know?
Yeah.
It's not just a brad nailer gun, you know? Do
Let's
something
say-
that'll run something.
Yeah, my pancake that I got as a combo with a nail gun. I mean,
Yeah.
while it could work,
Yeah.
not what you want to dedicate to work.
No, yeah. Well, like I said, a pancake will work. It's not if you already have one. Now that's a different story. But if you're
Yeah.
like starting up a shop, why are you going to buy? It doesn't really work that well compressor compared. And
Mhm.
really, we're talking price wise. There's not much difference. Now the only issue is, do you have enough space for a 5-gallon compared to a smaller compact? You know, that's where I would maybe say if you don't have the room, then go for something kind of smaller. But if you got the room and you're starting up a shop, go get the bigger one. You know, it'll be well worth your money down the road when you start finding other uses for your compressor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, let me ask you a fun question. So, what's the weirdest casting y'all done?
Zach's got some good ones.
Man, I got a lot of ones. Well, you know what? Actually, I'm looking on my my little shop table. Actually, it's a Wood Whisperer special, the assembly table, my version of it. But I'm looking on that table, and I have 2 stalks of Brussels sprouts sitting there.
Now, when you're
Yeah.
casting a Brussels sprout, do you have to
Go ahead.
Well, I'm not doing the actual Brussels sprouts themselves. It was actually somebody contacted me on Instagram and said, "Hey, I got Brussels sprout stalks. Do you want me to send them to you? They're fully dried out." And I'm like, "Okay," And so I actually finished up that project. We did it actually a while ago, but at Trader Joe's, I had never seen Brussels sprout stalks before, or I don't know, just never thought about it. I don't like Brussels sprouts either. That's the funny thing. And so they had these things, and I'm like, oh, I'm totally buying those for the thumbnail for my video. Put my bowl in the middle. So I made a bowl out of these stalks, and I actually dye stabilized them, some like red and green. And then
that was
just
going to be
kinda-
my question: is do you have to stabilize them before you cast them?
Yeah, well, you definitely, like pretty much any material, you really need to dry it out completely. And we're not, like in the woodworking world, people say, oh, is it dry? And that means like equalized to your shop, humidity levels, the ambient humidity. When we're talking dried, we're talking 0% moisture content, and throw your moisture meter out the window. That they don't work for this. You're going for no moisture in them. And so, any kind of material, you really want it to be totally dry. The thing is, some resins, Alumilite reacts, it'll react with moisture. So that's number one. It'll foam up and ruin your casting. Or the other problem with it is, if there's moisture in there, these resins, they're thermoplastics. They heat up when they cure.
Mm-hmm.
And so what ends up happening is that moisture in there converts to a gaseous material, and so you got air bubbles coming out of your wood or whatever. And so you really need to just dry it out completely before you cast it. And so that's one of the reasons why I stabilize a lot of the stuff, is just I don't want to have to. You can put it in the oven, dry it out for a day or two, but you can't just take it out of the oven and just leave it sitting on your table. It'll start sucking moisture up instantly.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it just makes more sense. If I'm going to dry it out, I may as well just stabilize it.
Okay.
That way I can pretty much pull it out whenever I want. Now, even you got to kind of watch out. I learned a lesson in Texas at the wood turning symposium there. I was doing demos there, cast a pine cone, and it cracked. And I'm looking at it like, this shouldn't have happened. I don't know what happened. And everyone around there was like, oh, that's just moisture. And I'm like, oh, I'm from Nevada. We don't have that. So, like this, and the pine cone was stabilized. That's why I was like, I didn't think about it. So you also kind of have to watch out for surface moisture, I think is what happened. Typically, I'm going to just toss, after that lesson, I kind of toss things in the oven just to knock off any surface moisture. But in general, if you stabilize it, like I stabilize a bunch of pine cones and a bunch of that sagebrush at once,
Mm-hmm.
and then I just toss it in a Ziploc bag, and that's good enough in my climate. If you're running 80% humidity, you may have to do the pop it in the oven thing for a little bit if it's stabilized, and just kind of knock that surface moisture off.
Okay.
But yeah. So you got to fully dry out anything. Now I actually have tried casting a Brussels sprout, and what I tried to do to dry it out was use silica gel, like just fill a cup of it and cover it. And I don't know. I don't know if it's me or maybe I'm just like too impatient with this stuff. I've never gotten that to work too well personally.
Mm-hmm.
Did you add butter and bacon?
Yeah. I think that might help. But yeah, so I've never really been able to get something like that completely dried out without it like rotting, basically.
Yeah.
But like the stalks worked out pretty good. So how about you, Casey? What have you done?
So definitely not as fun of stuff as you. But still some interesting things, I would say. I've done pine cones. I've done sweet gum pods, like those seed pods that like those little spiky balls that you'll see on the ground.
Okay.
I regularly do colored pencils and gold leaf, silver leaf, and copper leaf, which look pretty cool. What else? I've done flowers, like dried flowers.
Oh yeah. That makes
And then
sense.
like mini, like different versions of pine cones. Like I've done many. I think they might be redwood. I'm not sure, but they're like really really small. Just a bunch of random stuff like that. But I don't think Zach kind of like hit the tip of the iceberg, because I know he's done like dog food. What's like you could just start throwing them out there, Zach. Like I know you've done pasta. Like
we did
stuff.
mushrooms. Forest like dye stabilized mushrooms. Actually, one of the fun ones that we did was Gretchen and I went up to I think it was for kind of our anniversary. We went up to Tahoe and stayed at Harrah's up there, and we went down to the fun center and we were playing all the games and all that stuff. And then we got like little mini spiders, like the little plastic spiders. Cast those for Halloween. That was fun. I don't know, lots of different things. Oh, actually, one of my favorites I think is Gretchen got me Pez dispensers that were Star Wars themed. So there was a little BB-8, a Chewie, a Han Solo, and a Rey, I think.
Okay.
And so there's these 4 things, and I'm like, oh man, I am totally the first sphere. So like a round orb. Those are becoming hot. Everybody in the turning world likes to do those, and they like the hybrid. Wood and resin. Mm-hmm. I'm like, when I do my first sphere, I'm casting a piece of burl and I'm gluing BB-8 into the middle of this sphere, and so that's I keep that in my shop. I have a little orange sphere with a little BB-8 Pez dispenser top thing in there, so it's pretty fun. That's the fun thing about casting is, you can do anything. You can put anything in it. You can shape it into any shape you want, add all these different colors or make it transparent, and it's fun seeing what comes of this stuff.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, it's amazing the variety of things you can cast to the turn.
So, well, with that, maybe we should move on to our fortnightly beer choices.
Here.
Here. So, I guess I'll start us out because Dyami's going to give me a hard time. I'm breaking out into one of my favorite Texas-based brewers, Carbach. And
Kyle, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop you even right now. Before you get into the name and style of beer, what's the date?
What is it? November 7th or 8th, somewhere
it's
around
November
there?
7th as we record this. So I was curious. So it's November 7th. I'm sorry. Please go on.
So this is a seasonal beer, and it's Yule Shoot Your Eye Out. Yule spelling Yule. So it is a Christmas ale, and it's absolutely a fantastic Christmas ale. Mm. So, they're out here, and yes, we can still get some Oktoberfest too here in Texas, but it's a red ale, and it's actually brewed with orange peel, and it's absolutely
good.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. It's relatively middling alcohol content, 5.6, and it's brewed out of about 4 different types of malts and 3 different types of, 1 different type of hops, should I say. But they say recommended pairings. I'm sitting here looking at the website: wild game, hearty stews, lamb chops, spice cake, family, and my favorite recommended pairing: Christmas cookies.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
All beer goes well.
But
with Christmas
yeah,
cookies.
but it's absolutely fantastic. It's got a great can with from the movie. It's got the leg lamp on the front of the can, so it's absolutely fantastic. And actually, it's a great beer. It's a great beer. So
That's excellent. I'll enjoy it next season.
exactly.
I have a beer that's actually seasonal.
Oh, another Christmas ale.
Yeah, not quite. You've been enjoying Oktoberfest all summer long, and I've complained that not only is it like 400 degrees in Texas, but even in New York, it has been unseasonably warm. And while it's still a little warmer than it should be in November, there is a chill to the air. So it is finally Oktoberfest season, as far as I'm concerned, because it's really about the temperature. So I've been enjoying the Warsteiner Oktoberfest, which is from Warsteiner Brewery in Germany, and it is it's a very light. It's light for an Oktoberfest. It is not a light beer by any stretch of the imagination, but it is light and smooth for an Oktoberfest. And they're very very drinkable. It's a delightful beer.
Nice.
Very nice.
Fantastic.
So
Sean,
I was gonna say I took a page out of Dyami's book this week in getting something that probably no one else can get with all his 6-point they release one a day kind of things. But I did just stumble upon it, so I went to the shop today, and I stumbled upon this can with a kind of a paper. See if I can rub it. It's like a paper label on it. But it's this brewery called Nowhere in Particular, and it's batch number 24. It's an Imperial Goza, however you say it. But it says distinctly, this beer you're holding is a beer that will never be made again. It is the only of its kind, and it represents the ever-changing lineage meant to blah, blah, blah. Anyway, very good. I didn't even see where these things are made. I don't know. No, I have no idea where they're from. But it was it was
probably
a nice,
somewhere in Ohio. I would
Yeah, somewhere
assume.
close to you, no?
I don't know. I'm gonna look it up. I'll chime in a little bit. But it was a very nice little easy drinking goza, and I know, Dyami, I like the sours, so
Yeah. Well,
maybe easy for me and not for all. But
let me ask about a goes. What makes it an Imperial goes?
you know what? I don't know.
It's regal.
It comes in at 7%. Usually the gozas are a really kind of low ABV.
Yeah.
They're
very
pretty
sessionable
sessionable.
usually.
Yeah. And it wasn't heavy by any means. It's actually fairly light. What is it said? Ale brewed with pink Himalayan salt and coriander.
Oh, that's the best salt.
It is.
Oh yeah.
It's got health benefits as far as I can tell. So that's why I use it. Drink it. But,
It's better in liquid form.
there you go. Go. Yeah. There you go.
Well,
Go ahead. Try to find some.
We'll work on it. So Zach and Casey, we do have the fortnightly beer recommendations, but you can recommend anything from beer to other spirits to your favorite spring water. So, Zach, anything to recommend?
Well, this is going to be a little bit different, but so some of you guys might be familiar with Kona Brewing Company.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm not going to recommend anything specific from them because in the States, we get whatever they sell, and it's just kind of a more of the
But
small mass produced. It's good, but
Yeah.
what I'm going to recommend is if you're ever on the Big Island, go to the Kona Brewing Company, and I can't remember what day it was, but one of the days, the brewmaster there just like plays with brews or whatever, like with recipes, and they have random weird whatever on tap that you can do at the tasting.
Oh,
It was the coolest thing ever. The last time we were there, we went and had something that literally was a beer and it tasted like caramel. It was just crazy. It was just an amazing kind of like fun thing, and it reminded me of what I do in my shop. I just play with resin and come up with new things, and I was like, I can get on board with this. So if you're ever in Hawaii, hit the Big Island up and go to the Kona Brewing Company. Get like, you don't have to have a tour or anything. Just go in there and try and I want to say it was like Thursdays. They have, and I forget what they call it. It's some kind of event going on there, but they have stuff that you'll never get anywhere else in the world, basically, kind of thing, and probably never again.
Yeah, I found that. Like, I've had Kona beer here in Texas. You can get it, and it's fine. But I was in Maui last year, and we had some stuff on draft, and it was a totally different beer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
yeah, I've had 6 points in Brooklyn, and it's very different than the 6 points I got on Long Island.
Yeah.
Really?
No.
Was it the?
I'm sorry.
He's just playing with it. Yeah.
Well,
So
yeah.
Casey, anything for
Yeah,
you?
yeah. So, first let me preface this with a question for you guys, because I've been pretty impressed with the growth of this brewery. Have you guys heard of Lagunitas?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Hadn't
So
made it
that's-
to Texas yet, I don't think.
so I actually went out of the country over the summer, and I even saw it a couple places over in Europe, which blew my
Wow.
mind. So I mentioned at the beginning of the show that I'm from Sonoma County, and one of the small towns in Sonoma County is called Petaluma, and that's where Lagunitas Brewery was founded and started. And I believe it was literally within the last 10 years. Like, they're not that old. And within the last few years, like maybe 5 or less, or maybe even sooner than that, they were bought by some bigger company, and now they have
Heineken.
and now they have a distribution center in Chicago, and so now they're all over the states. But I'd highly recommend it. I'm sure that it might taste a little more different on tap, but just the typical Lagunitas IPA is really good. And also they have a little something IPA as well, or maybe it's an ale, but pretty much any of the stuff from there is pretty good. And it's been
Yeah, I think I'm totally wrong. I think I have seen that. Little something IPA. I think I have seen that. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they have nationwide distribution. Lagunitas is a good brewery. They're very similar to Goose Island in that they were a really good microbrew who got bought by a much bigger company and has gotten really big distribution while still basically remaining true to their original brewery ideals and types of beers and flavors and whatnot.
Yeah, that's similar to the brand I was talking about, Karbach. Yeah, they were that kind of brewery, and they got bought out by whoever the big one is that owns everybody.
InBev?
Yeah, InBev, exactly. So they got bought out by them. But yeah, they've stayed true to their roots. They're still brewing everything here in Houston, as far as I know. So yeah, but at a much bigger facility.
Yeah. Do any of you guys get Rheingeist?
I've heard of it. I'm not sure
they're based in Cincinnati, but at least in Ohio, they've got wide distribution. And it's one of those things. It's kind of like Lagunitas. If it's blown up in the last decade or so, like as far as I can tell, they started in like 2012, and now it's on like every grocery store shelf. They've absolutely exploded in distribution and are well regarded at the same time.
Are they bought by a bigger company, or are they still independent?
No, they are still independent.
And they've managed to survive that growth, because I've talked to a lot of smaller breweries here on the island and up in New England, and most of them have scaled back their distribution because they found it was impossible to maintain. Honestly, I'm not even sure what it was impossible to maintain, but I've heard more than one say that they have retracted their distribution because they just can't keep up with distributing in these wide areas. So that's impressive that an independently owned brewery was able to do that.
Yeah, they have an interesting tale, and it's totally a side tangent, but a buddy of mine visited their brewery in South Cincinnati. You remember when we were down there and we had that meet up in the Christian Moorheim.
Yes.
So Cincinnati has this rich history of brewing. Back from the 1800s, all the Germans that came to town, and they all had like multiple different breweries. Rheingeist moved into a building that was used since 1895 for brewing, and now it's got something in the couple 100,000 barrel capacity of production.
Wow.
Yeah, it's huge. To the point where the Cincinnati Museum of History had a dinosaur exhibit loaned to their showroom in the structure that they have. Like, you could fit a Stegosaurus skeleton in their brewery in the open space. Like
you do.
like you do. It's pretty amazing. But yeah, and I just found it. They started in 2013, and they are growing. And I get that I'm in the same state as them, so it's not maybe it's not the biggest distribution, but it's a ridiculous success story. And again, yeah, having not sold out or joined in with some other big distributor or existing stronghold.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Next time we're in Cincinnati, we'll have to check them out.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, speaking of that, I'm assuming that Woodworking America, as much as I hate to say it, is at least for now dead.
Let's call it furlough.
Furloughed, okay.
Furloughed, yeah, I like that.
I have seen that in addition to the fine woodworking hands-on classes in Tampa in February, Fine Woodworking Live, they haven't set anything up in terms of tickets or sales or whatnot, but they have announced dates that it'll be April 26th through the 28th of 2019 back in Massachusetts. So you need to drag yourself out of Ohio and come to Massachusetts, Sean.
I know.
That's right.
You know, I always have something come up. Actually, what are the dates?
April 26th to 28th. Your brother's already married. You can't do that again.
Hold on. Checking Glass City Marathon 2019 because I already registered. April 28th. Is that the same weekend?
It is the same weekend. The 26th to 28th includes the 28th.
I'm out.
Man.
You know, you could run to Massachusetts.
That's a hell of a lot longer than 26 miles. A lot longer. But I digress.
Yeah, I brought us off on a tangent. But anyway, for anyone who wants to go, Fine Woodworking Live is going to be a blast.
I'll be there.
As will I. And I would encourage you guys to go because you'll probably be the only ones doing resin casting.
Yeah. I don't know. You never know these days.
You never
I've
know.
seen a lot of
Yeah, you really don't. You really don't. But I will say that it is certainly the spiritual successor of WIA. And they seem to have finally gotten the pattern right after a couple of years of experimenting with different programs. So it's a good show. But anyway, before we finally wrap this whole thing up, gentlemen, we've barely touched on the fact that you guys do a podcast of your own.
Woo! Started it up.
Yeah. Well, and it is the Resin Cast. And other than to say that it really goes into much greater detail about the subject we've talked to you about in terms of how to do resin casting and methods of resin casting and everything anyone could ever want to know about resin casting. Anything else you want to share about the podcast?
Well, mainly, you know, it's obviously about resin casting. We touch on stabilizing and then also turning subjects, and then just kind of we're also trying to kind of talk about just being, you know, I guess makers, let's say, you know, air quotes, makers, you know, people working in shops doing whatever. We have some, we try to blend all four of those kind of topics.
Okay.
Just, you know, different types of things, but we're both kind of doing, you know, resin casting. We both kind of do the same types of things. So, and we love talking about resin, obviously. So, yeah, I hope everybody checks it out. It's pretty fun, especially if you're thinking about getting into resin casting. I think it would be helpful. Just kind of hearing, you know, it's one of those, you know, audio things are great to pop in when you're driving or running or doing whatever. and it allows you that long form to kind of just, touch on subjects and kind of really go around and explain them. I think, and just and explore things, I think, is also another good description of what you can do. And it's just something, I hope that our show basically kind of just fills in some of the gaps that may be missing in other, video forms and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully it'll kind of inspire people to get out there and try it out too. So those are the two big things I think that we're focused on with it.
I think it's wonderful, having listened to I think everything but the newest episode at this point. Mm-hmm. You guys are doing a nice job.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah,
fun.
I think. Yeah, to Dyami's point, I think we covered so some of the questions that I think y'all have completely answered in some of your previous episodes on the cast, but just to give our listeners a flavor for it. And if you're definitely even remotely interested, I encourage y'all to listen to their podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us on, guys. It was really cool.
No problem. You. So where can our listeners find the podcast and more about the two of you?
Sure. So you can find our podcast pretty much anywhere, specifically iTunes. It's probably one of the easiest for people. You can find it on SoundCloud, and then you can also find it on our website, theresincast.com. My info, the main kind of brand name for my shop and everything is Wine Country Woodworks. Probably makes sense after the kind of stories I've told you guys.
Yep.
So you can search that on Google. You'll find my website. You'll probably also find my YouTube videos and hopefully my Instagram as well. That's kind of my info.
Yeah, and I'm NV Woodworks, or Zach Higgins. You can find my YouTube channel, nvwoodworks.com. If anybody needs any turning blanks, I sell them.
In time for Christmas, I hear.
Just in time for Christmas projects. But so nvwoodworks.com. And then I'm pretty active on Facebook and Instagram, too, for social media. A little bit here and there on Twitter.
Sure.
Dyami.
Hello?
So we can just go on to us then. I'm Sean Wisniewski. You can find me at SeanW78 pretty much on any social media, or my actual name on Facebook. I'm there too.
Sean Wisniewski, your actual name?
Yeah, that's my actual name. That's my real name.
What's your fake name?
I go by many names.
Aliases.
All right, I'm Dyami Kyle of the Penultimate Woodshop. And Modern Woodworkers Association. You can find me on Twitter at Dyami Kyle or Instagram at Penultimate Woodshop.
And I'm Kyle Barton. I'm on the only social media platform that matters. That's Instagram, and you can find me at barton.kyle.
Can you hear my eyes roll, Kyle?
Yeah. I'll put that in there for you.
Dyami waving a G+ flag.
That ship was for to sail, and I am no longer there, but I still don't appreciate why everyone seems to be fleeing Twitter.
Who knows? It's what the kids are doing these days, I guess.
Those damn kids.
Well, with that just about wraps up our show for now. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show on iTunes or Google Play Music. That's still a thing. Just search for the Modern Woodworkers Association. Then you'll never miss one of our exciting episodes, like our last epic 200th episode. If you missed that one, you're missing a lot. Anyway.
Indeed. If you're a new listener, please do skip it because it really will have nothing to interest you. But if you've come to slog the whole episodes with us, hopefully you enjoyed it because it was just a nice conversation among friends. And let me touch on the fact that the last episode was episode 200, and this is episode 218. And while my degree is in English, I do know how to count. And what we decided to do was actually number every episode because we were not necessarily the most professional or regular podcasters in the beginning. And we have a number of episodes, 17 in fact, that are not numbered. And they were, this special and afternoon special and lots of other things. So what we did is with 200 kind of readjusted the numbering system. So this is actually the 218th episode. So that is why we took the jump from 200 to 218. And at this point going forward, every episode will simply be the next number. So look forward to episode 219 next week. But thank you for listening to the Modern Woodworkers Association. If you like the show, you can visit modernwoodworkersassociation.com. You can follow the MWA on Twitter at MWA_national, on Instagram at MWA_podcast, or you can like the MWA on Facebook. And the best thing you can do is tell a friend and get them to subscribe, because if they like woodworking, hopefully they'll enjoy us just chatting away about resin for weeks. So with that, go out in your shop, build yourself a stove, put a pressure pot in it, and power carve something. All right, gentlemen.
Sweet.
All right. Thank you guys so much. This
Thank
was a lot of
you.
fun.
Sorry we drone on a bit more than you guys, but we
That's
enjoyed the
cool.
conversation.
We enjoyed talking about all the good stuff. I'm gonna stop my recording now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So do you want me to email you that, Dyami?
Yeah, that would be great.